Good afternoon, everyone. On November 4th of last year, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts passed a motion that I filed to have the Auditor General review the government payouts to bargaining units within the education sector. Earlier today, the Auditor General confirmed that our government paid over $80 million in payouts, personal development, and other expenses to Ontario's teachers' unions, coming directly from the elementary and secondary school education budget, which is meant for grants for student needs, technology, desks, school repairs, and books, and the like. At least $22 million of this came in 2006 and was undocumented. This process only stopped after the government was caught by the media and the opposition last year. She said that Ontario was an outlier in Canada in this type of unprecedented funding, and that it only occurred in one other sector in Ontario, in healthcare, at a much smaller cost years ago. The fact that this is so rare and there is limited transparency, the auditor has called for the government to cease this type of secret funding, and of course, once they were caught, they did. Clearly, this points to a flawed two-tiered collective bargaining process that isn't focused on maximizing rare education dollars in the system. Instead of money that should have been intended for kids in classrooms, money that could have been used for ABA and IBI funding for students with autism, funding repairs in schools across Ontario, maintaining special education funding at its current levels in 38 school boards across the province who were forced to cut $22.5 million, or even keeping schools open across the province, including in the city of Ottawa. This money was spent instead, in some cases, without receipts or without a true picture of the classroom benefit with respect to PD days. This report, once again, has parents across Ontario questioning this government's priorities in education. Happy to take any questions.
What's wrong with the government spending money on the unions for conducting professional development that's supposed to help train teachers?
Well, mostly that's dealt with through the collective bargaining process. Certainly in the Progressive Conservative Caucus, we support PD days, but there is a collective bargaining process that suggests that. In addition, we have, as the auditor states in her report, no clear picture of how that's been dealt with and whether or not it actually contributed to student achievement. So I think the question is more like there is a bargaining process where PD days are worked on with the school boards as well as with the Ministry of Education. This is outside of that. So we had about $80 million in this directed fund, and throughout the report you find there's about another $10 million that have gone either through a direct transfer to a fund or through school boards. So the truer picture is closer to $90 million, and I think parents across Ontario are wondering would it have been better spent on physical things in the classroom, keeping up with repairs, making sure that the special education classroom resources are there. And I think it's a very clear question of priorities with what this government has and what most parents expect.
You're saying, you spend money that went towards professional development, spend it on desks or whatever. Is that what you're saying? That maybe this?
I'm saying that there's a collective bargaining process that accounts for with PD days, and I'm saying in this particular issue, there's $90 million that should be going to kids in classrooms, but that wasn't. That's exactly.
That PD that professional development seems to be the issue. Like, it's in this case the government's handing money to the unions, and the unions are running these workshops or whatever.
Yeah, $90 million, 22 million of it was undocumented, and I'm telling you, and I think the Minister just told you, as well as the Auditor General, that there's a collective bargaining process as well that deals with professional development days. No one here is begrudging professional development days. We're just saying that these are extra payouts, and it comes from a very small budget in education, where we see right now across Ontario kids in special education being restricted from their full potential. We're seeing closures of demonstration and provincial demonstration schools. We're seeing kids moved off the IBI, ABA list. We're seeing schools being closed. We're seeing parents asked to fundraise for school repairs. So I ask you, as a parent and any other parent out there, is that your priority, or is it to circumvent a collective bargaining process through this two-tiered process that hasn't clearly worked?
Did the province spend this money did the Liberals spend this money to curry favor with the teachers' unions?
You know, that's not for me to answer. I'm not a Liberal, never will be one, and I can say that that's an answer for them to provide you with. I mean, I think you just have to look at Schedule 7 in the auditor's report to make your own judgments in the years between 2005 to 2007, the years 2009 to 2011, and of course in the years leading up to the 2014 campaign. But you guys can make those decisions, and you can ask the government that. I can only certainly look at the numbers in Schedule 7. I'll go to Ashley first.
So I think the question that Mike was trying to get at is whether the unions are the ones who should be providing PD, regardless of whether that's part of collective bargaining or not. Ontario seems to be unique in that that's where it's done as opposed to through, say, a school board or like Ministry 1 workshops. I think that's what we're all trying to wrap our head around.
Well, you know what, I appreciate that, but the focus for me today is the auditor's report, specifically with respect to the payouts. Obviously, PD days are essential and they're important. The auditor even said there's 3 different views: the ministry view, there's the school board view, and then there's the union view, and she was pretty clear in that report. And I'll leave that to our education critic to determine. But my issue here is the government came out and said, look, this is a net zero deal. It has been all along. In fact, we found out that it's not, $1 million, it's not $3 million, it's not even $7 million. It's been $90 million over a certain period of time. Some of that money has been undocumented. It was through a process that was very ad hoc at the beginning, then legislated, and the payments actually had to increase after that. And then they had to stop once it became clear. And I guess it's a question of priorities. I'm the Treasury Board critic, so my issue is about the priorities of where we spend money. And when the government says, and as the minister just did in one of her final responses, that this is net zero within plus or minus $50 million, I think that Ontarians would find that to be quite egregious. So that's where I'll come from, and I'll leave it to our education critic to respond. Christina, and then.
Do you see this as payback for all the money the Liberals have received from the education unions over the years?
Well, it's hard for me to answer that question. I'm just simply looking at money that I think should be intended for kids in classrooms, and to point out that the government has debunked its own myth of these net zeros. Again, I'll get others to draw conclusions on whether or not they saw an increase in funding during those years leading up to an election and post-elections, and how that may have contributed, but certainly not for me to say.
I had a question about the 1,000 per teacher for Francophone teachers that was given to school boards but then funneled to the French, l'Association des enseignants franco-ontariens. What do you make of that?
Well, it was interesting when I was reading the report because, as you know, they're not the only union that had asked for the PD days, and again, we're not complaining about PDs. It's just it's sort of an unorthodox way to achieve them because you would expect that to be through the collective bargaining process. I think the one of the recommendations, I believe it was recommendation 6, where the auditor specifically said there needs to be more study on how these PD days are being carried out and how effective they are for student achievement. So I'll leave that to the experts on that. What I did find interesting is that some of the unions didn't actually want the payout, and they didn't. And if they did, they wanted it for PD and not just for the check. So I think that was pretty incredible finding from the auditor.
In terms of the bargaining costs, that was sort of the original issue in all of this. Are you satisfied from this report that was all above board, or does this raise some questions for you?
I think 2006 is a year where you look back and think, how could the government at the time, this government, think it was appropriate to give that much money out undocumented? It's never a good idea, but that was certainly a great deal of money. That this is such an unorthodox practice, not only just in Ontario, but throughout the rest of Canada, I think speaks to volumes to the judgment of the government, particularly as it comes to scarce resources for our kids in our classrooms. So, I mean, from that perspective, I'm glad that there's some clarity. I was surprised by how high the number was. I think that was something that stood out to us. And I think we have other questions that we'll ask, which is why, with this respect to this report, I'll be asking the Public Accounts Committee to do a further study on this and actually bring the ministry and school board officials in. And we have no jurisdiction over the unions, but I'm sure that many of them would want to collaborate on this to improve the process and ensure that that education funding goes to where it's needed.
Didn't the Conservatives under Harris give teachers' unions money for bargaining as well?
Less than $1 million over a period of 3 years, compared to $89 million over the last 12. So I think that.
government.
Well, I don't.
mean,
I don't really think so. I think you're looking at some small numbers. It does go back. I don't have the true picture, other than I did read the report, and it is less than $1 million. And again, over a period of 13 or 14 more years, you're looking at 89 million. So I think it's disparate. But yes, it is a practice, and it needs to be changed. And just further to that, I was not a member of the assembly at that time, so I came actually in 2006 when the big bonanza started.
but this is the pot calling the kettle black, a little bit.
Well, no, not at all. I mean, you have a government that's been in office for 13 years that has increased funding by $89 million and to union payouts, and we've not seen any real enhancements in the schools. We have this last week, if you look around, we have school closures about to happen across Ontario. Just yesterday, we had a failed motion on trying to restore ABA, IBI funding to students with autism. A couple weeks ago, we had demonstration schools here for the deaf and the blind. They're being closed across Ontario. We have parents fundraising for not just books anymore and not just school activities, but for actual repairs in their schools. So no, I don't think so. I think this is a Liberal government initiative. That said, you know what happened 15, 16 years ago, there's very few members of our caucus that were around for that. All I can tell you is the practice today, when you're giving $14 million, $12 million, or even $22 million with really virtually no strings attached, that's a problem, and that's what this Liberal government's done.
Thank you,
Was it a
everybody.
problem under Harris too? Did
No.
they make a mistake in doing that?
Was it a problem? No. Did he make a mistake? You know what? I'd have to look at the specifics, but I would suggest that the line of the Progressive Conservative Party today is money that should go into classrooms should be intended for classrooms and for kids. So, yeah, thanks.